Okay, everyone, I'm going to try something a little different today. We're going to talk about the Slav games, the Slav Defense. So, as we were playing around with our Queen's Gambit line, we saw the Slav pop up a few times. D4, followed by D5, we push the C4 pawn, trying to control the center. And instead of seeing a response of the E6 pawn, we start to see this C6 pawn. The C6 pawn moves us into the Slav Defense. You can see over here, Slav Defense. It gets its name specifically from the masters out of the Slavic region. Specifically, our guy Alekhine helped popularize this moveset. In the 1920s, 1930s, we saw a lot of it. Specifically, the reason Alekhine's name pops up is because the 1935 and 1937 championships, he used this. He brought these the C6 Slav defense out against the Gambit line, the Queen's Gambit lines, with success. So Alekhine takes some of the credit for popularizing the Slav defense, and because of the other Slavic masters who were using it, this is where the Slav defense gets its name. Now, let's talk about why the Slav defense is strong. So, normally when we defend from the black's perspective, normally when we're defending this pawn, but we're also opening up one of our bishops. Now, in the Slav defense, as opposed to the standard Queen's Gambit declined, in the Slav defense, we are opening up our light square bishop. Now, why is this important? Notice that when white pushed its pawns up, it has weakened the light squares right in the center of the board. So a light square bishop can take full advantage of that, and that's basically what a lot of the strength of the Slavic defense comes from. Not all of it, but that is one of the main goals is, hey, white pieces, you've weakened these squares, so I'm going to take full advantage, and I'm going to power up my light square bishop and use these really long open diagonals. Now, there's some other benefits, too. You remember in some of the... Well, we'll talk about that when we get there. But this is the Slav defense. Now, let's look at what happens... From white's perspective, most of what white is going to do is identical to what we did in the regular Queen's Gambit lines. So in the regular Queen's Gambit lines, our knights are going to end up on these two squares. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do when we see the Slav. We're just going to continue to develop. Normally, I would play the C3 knight first, but the official Slav move order is F3 first. So we push the F3 knight, help control the center. Our opponent does the same. They push the F6 knight, controlling the center. So these two knights are controlling 1, 2, 3, 4, all 4 center squares. And that's what we want to see. Now, white is going to continue just like it would normally in the Queen's Gambit lines and go ahead and get the rest of its knight out. Or the other one. There's 2 of them, and the rest of them is 1. So the other knight is going to come out. And so this brings us to kind of the main line of the Slav defense. What black is looking to do is notice this light diagonal here is still undefended, right? These knights can't get to that diagonal. There's only one square on that whole diagonal that is being contested at all. And notice this knight's job is really to be controlling part of this, the center. So this is the weakness that black is looking to kind of take advantage of. However, I'm going to caution you. Don't bring this bishop out too early. There's a reason. Number one is this pawn is undefended. So whenever you move a bishop from its starting row, you undefend the pawn that it's naturally guarding. So once you move this bishop out, this pawn becomes undefended. And we have seen this because what can happen is all of a sudden this queen can infiltrate. Right? So from this perspective, what white would do is white would go ahead and capture on the center. Black would capture back. Notice we both have an attacker and defenders on that square. Now we're going to infiltrate. So we're adding a second attacker. Knight black still has 2 defenders on it, but this queen also is aiming up on that B7 pawn. So black now has to figure out how to defend this b7 pawn. Well, okay, maybe I can either push the pawn. That's fine. Go ahead and push that pawn. But now you are continually weakening the queen side. Remember, one of the reasons that one of the things that black is eventually going to do is maybe push an a6 move to stop my knight, from white's knight, from infiltrating in the position this way. But if you've pushed b6, then pushing a6 weakens that side even more. Well, this queen is a defender, right? Can we maybe slide the queen up? Right? That kind of defends both. Okay, that's fine too. But again, what we're saying from white's perspective is you are weakening some of the queen structure here. My knight can quickly jump in, immediately putting pressure along this diagonal. Along the queen. Eventually, I'm going to push my pawn up, my e-pawn, like I always do, and then my bishop is going to get free. And what happens if your bishop gets free and pins that queen? Yeah, that's material loss you don't want to happen. So there are some weaknesses in this position, and that's what white is saying. White is saying, I can develop and attack your weaknesses. Yes, you got your bishop along this diagonal, but I'm going to exert more pressure for you. So don't get your light square bishop, or don't get your light square bishop out early if you're playing from black. Let's delete these. So knight has committed both of its knights. It is now black's turn to move. I'm going to show you a very interesting move order here. Now, normally in the Queen's Gambit accepted lines, you don't take early, right? Because what that can allow is, you're right. What that can allow is you can end up with a queen along this diagonal, chasing, putting pressure along the king, or you can get this weird infiltration thing. Remember we saw that? Black is trying to defend this pawn, so it's going to push, a b5 pawn move, and then we're going to counter, and then we're going to undermine, and then we're going to get pressure along this diagonal. Now, by waiting for white to position its knight up here first, we kind of block that, and we allow black time to now develop pieces, right? So to start developing these pieces to prevent that infiltration. So once we wait for white to commit to this knight, then we can capture. Now, eventually, black is going to want to capture back. White's going to want to capture that black pawn back, right? So here's what white's most logical move would be, right? You'd think. Open this up to head for this, to recapture along with our light square bishop. Notice, since we've already pushed the c-pawn, this b5 pawn push now becomes a lot stronger, and the knight is in the way, so we're not going to get the queen infiltrating. Now what? So let's try what we normally would do, right? We're normally going to go ahead and try to undermine the structure, but one of the things that black can do is it can push past. There's nothing to take this pawn, and now the knight has to go somewhere. Well, the knight can only go two places. The knight can only go to e2, or it can go over here to a1, or a2. The problem with knight to e2 is you have now allowed black to push a queenside attack that is now all defended. Eventually, we're going to see this pawn move as well. Is that right? Maybe not. Maybe it's not this pawn. I hold off on that thought. But we are kind of trapping white's dark square bishop because this pawn can't push. We're kind of trapping here. So what black is saying is that I have now forced you to move your knight out of the way. This knight's probably going to end up over here on g3 at some point. Yeah, knight to g3 is coming, which is a very strong square for the knight. Notice after you castle and the king is sitting here, this knight can defend back rank issues really nicely. So yeah, so white is saying, I'm happy with my knights, but I'm not happy that black has a pawn storm happening on the queen side. Now, eventually, we're going to get our rest of our pieces out. Right? black is going to continue to develop as normal, but we have already taken control of the queen side, and we have a strong queen side attack. So that's another one of the kind of options you can look at. Now, what happens if the knight doesn't go to A2, go to E2 and goes to A2 instead? Now, white is saying, hey, I'm going to get back one of my pawns, right? Everybody's happy, everybody's honky-dory. I'm going to get back one of my pawns. Black makes a standard developing move, opens up an attack on that knight, on a defense on that pawn. White can get its pawn back, but notice this knight. This knight is basically dead in the water. The knight can't go here, and it can't go here, and it's stuck waiting to basically go back to C1 once the dark square bishop gets developed. If the dark square can get developed, because you have to make another pawn move, you know, you're thinking, okay, well, I'll make my bishop move here to put pressure on this particular square. Okay, well, I can get my queen out, right? I can continue my developing while white is spent trying to either, number one, get this knight back into the game, or number two, eliminate this pawn. White is now going to spend its resources focusing right here, and black can then spend its resources developing normally. Let's say maybe get the bishop out, maybe castle, maybe get the queen involved, things like that, right? There's a lot of things that black can do while white is spending tempo trying to chase this configuration. So this is another thing that we can look at from black's perspective, an advantage that black can have on the Slav game. So after we've committed to our knight move, we go ahead and capture, and then white should not try to immediately get its pawn back, right? So white should wait, because if you try to take your pawn back, black is going to push the B pawn and really try to screw over this knight. Pretty interesting stuff. All right. So now let's back all this up and let's look at the main line. Let's just delete everything right here, knight to C3. So white makes a knight to C3 move. Black sees that white has committed both of its knights, so black is going to capture. That is the main line move. White's best move from this plan, notice that we know from white's perspective that black is going to try to push this B5 pawn, because B5 is looking for B4. So that's one of the things that black is looking to do. Well, white can stop that by making an A4 push really early. So this early A4 push is going to stop the B5 pawn. Now you're thinking, well, why would it stop that? I can still push B5, right? No, because what happens if this happens? Well, okay, from black's perspective, I can still push down. I'm still golden, right? I can still push this pawn and chase this knight away. White has time to develop with tempo, and black says, I'm going to push down. Right? I'm threatening. You got to run this knight away. Here's one of the tactics. Notice this. So black now has to defend a check. A million ways that black can defend a check. We'll just say bishop to D7. White picks up the pawn and is going to pick up a second pawn here pretty soon. So the gambited pawn we're going to pick up, and instead of right now, instead of going down, we're going to go back to even. So in fact, we're actually going to be up a pawn at the end of that exchange. Yeah, we'll be up a whole pawn at the end of this exchange. So instead of being down a pawn or even, white is actually going up a pawn. So this early A4 move by white is kind of the anti-B5 move. It stops all of black's advantage from chasing this knight and locking this knight up, right? So keep that in mind, that this is A4 is the next correct move. So let's delete from here. So our opponent has captured. We're not going to capture back yet. We're going to stop the B4 or the B5 move. And now that black has finally taken care of a lot of the dangers of this particular pawn have been kind of resolved. So now black can go ahead and push bishop to f5. Now, if you're thinking, oh, but no, see, this pawn on c4 stops the queen infiltrating. So there's no more danger of the queen getting down and infiltrating. Now, eventually, yes, this pawn is going to fall, right? Eventually, this pawn is going to fall, and then the infiltrating becomes a situation again. But we have gained plenty of time to make sure that we continue our development and handle any situations that might arise. So this is the main lines. Our bishop is now, black has now taken over control of this nice long diagonal. In fact, two nice long diagonals, which white has weakened through all of its moves. Now the question is, what is white going to do? Well, from here, other than this a4, early a4 pawn move, white's going to continue like a normal queen's gambit, right? Get our pressure up on this pawn. Black is going to continue in very similar suit. Get my bishop ready to come out and get my dark square bishop involved. So then we could see a captures and then a pin. And again, we have kind of taken away the possibility of the queen infiltrating. You can capture back this way, you can capture this way. So, oh no, we've got this. Well, we don't really have this problem because we still have, right? Oh, that's a bad one, actually. That's a bad example. Undo, 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 undo that bad example. Don't improvise when you're trying to set up teaching. Don't improvise, delete from here. So yeah, bishop b4 is the main move. And from here, you'll see that, yeah, white's going to castle. You really, like I said, don't really have to worry about infiltrating too much. a5 defends. Yeah, that's what I should have looked at. a5 defends, and now this guy's not going anywhere. So we've propped up our bishop. Queen is not going to infiltrate. So we're safe. All right? All right. So let us back up. Delete from here. So now this is the main line of the Slav defense. This is only one line of the Slav defense, but this is one of the main lines. And so I would encourage all of us, as we're playing, if we see the Slav, right, we're playing our Queen's Gambit lines. We gambit our pawn. Our opponent plays a Slav defense. We can still continue to develop as normal. Right? We get our knights out. We are eventually going to push a pawn and get this guy handled. But before we do that, we need to make sure that we insert, from white's perspective, we're going to insert this a4 move. From black's perspective, I'm not going to get my, I'm not going to get my bishop out until I make at least one exchange here. White has committed, so making this exchange is perfectly acceptable. I've now picked up a pawn. I'm not 100% guaranteed to hold on to that pawn, but I am forcing white to deal with the situation. It forces white to make an early a-pawn move. And now we can get our bishop to b5, and we have now taken control of this really strong diagonal. And we are saying that we are equally developed, 2 pieces out, 2 pieces out, and we have control of a really strong diagonal, which at this point in the game, white has no way to take back control of. All right, so that's fine. Now, there is another line that we can look at. One of the lines, let's finish the main line. So the main line would be from here, after black sees white push a strong a-pawn, then notice that the dark square diagonal has been weakened. So we're going to go ahead and prepare our dark square diagonal. White's prepping to take his pawn back. Black gets the dark square diagonal ready to go. White captures. Black infiltrates. So both positions are saying that they have strong position, right? We've got a very strong position here from white's perspective. Black is also saying that we have a strong position. Black is saying that my 2 bishops are really strong right now. This one is keeping an eye on this particular knight, and this particular knight's job was to control the center, so we're taking away white's control of the center. Now, once white castles, that's not quite as severe anymore. But notice both people can castle pretty quickly, and then Like I said, if we have to, we can prop up this bishop. We can continue developing. We can get our knight involved in any number of a couple of ways, right? If I can get my arrows to draw properly, get our knight involved. This seems to be a great opportunity to put the knight on d7, possibly. Yep, knight b to d7 seems like a great opportunity, and it's exactly the move order. So that's the main line. All right, guys, the main line of the Slav. Looks fun, doesn't it? We're gonna try to get some games in. But before we get some games in, I did promise I would show you one extra thing. So let's look at the main line of the Slav. Captures, early a4 push, and then black gets its bishop out. Now, normally, like I said, we would push our e3 pawn, just like we do in the Queen's Gambit line. The Queen's Gambit declined in order to get ready to capture back our pawn. There is another aggressive move we could make, and it is this knight to e5. What knight to e5 does, it says I'm trying to put another attacker on this pawn, so I can capture this pawn back a different way. And what it's saying is I kind of want to push f3. This is one of the few times where pushing f3 is not so bad, because an e4 becomes very strong. Remember, the Slav defense, one of the main goals, not the only goal, but one of the main goals from black's perspective of the Slav defense is to take control of this long diagonal with his light square bishop. If I could, say, cut that influence, then we weaken the entire Slav defense, right? We weaken, not the entire, but one of the major goals of the Slav defense. We can weaken the major goal of the Slav defense by starting to push or take away the light square's control. So this is another line that could happen. It's a very aggressive line. Notice knight to d7 looks at immediately challenging this knight in the center. From here, we'll probably just capture our pawn back. Let's say that black develops. Maybe now is a great opportunity to push that f3 pawn. 100% prepping for this e4 pawn. Black would need to do something to maintain control. Normally, black would push the e6 pawn, right, to open up its dark square. But it's going to go ahead and push all the way up to e5 to try to start undermining and get some control back of the center. Notice it is a defended pawn, so we really can't do anything about that. But now white has achieved its goal of cutting off black's diagonal influence. So by going with this move order, it is, like I said, it's more aggressive. Notice this knight is a little kind of misplaced right now. This knight needs to get some defense on it. But we are working hard to cut off the light square bishop. We have weakened, and black would say, well, yeah, but you've weakened your kingside, right? You've pushed your forget about it pawn. You've got a knight over here that is still undefended that will need to get back into the game somehow and get defended. Probably bring it down, something like that. Not sure exactly where it would go. I have not played this particular variation. This is called the Kraus attack. So there you go. The Kraus attack version of the Slav defense. This very aggressive knight getting all the way out to your opponent's side of the board, trying to become a monster knight. Notice this pawn that would normally be able to dislodge it is blocked off, but our goal is to capture that pawn back, so we're now getting our sacrificed pawn back. Black continues to develop, and we're going to go ahead and cut off this light square bishop. So black is now trying to control the center using his pawns. We're going to, and notice, looks like the main line here is to continue to capture and capture. Yeah, and then try to get this bishop out to, this would cut off. Yeah, so this is a very interesting line. The queen has to retreat. Now we have prevented, we are preventing white from getting to castle. White still hasn't got any development. So there are some sacrifices to be made for something like this, but it does do what the goal is. The goal is to cut off the light square bishop. But this is 11 moves in, so this is no longer opening theory, really. This is basically playing somebody else's games. The main opening theory that I wanted to share with you was right up into here. So Queen's Gambit, we're going to Gambit the pawn. Opponent's going to push c6, move into the Slav defense. So we see the Slav, that's okay. We're going to just continue to develop our knights, just like we normally would. Continue to develop our knights like we normally would. Black says, okay, you've committed your knight. You've cut off the possibility of an influence along this line. So we're going to go ahead and capture. White says, okay, you've captured, so before I can capture back, I have to push a4, push an early a4 pawn. Now I can start prepping to capture back my pawn. Black is saying, now I can get my light square bishop out. And so then the choice becomes, do we make standard moves, a normal, everyday developing move, or do we go aggressive? And I leave that up to you guys to decide how you want to play this, because this is the beauty of chess, is finding your stride. Do you want to push the classical Slav game, or do you want to push the aggressive Slav game? All right, guys. So that is the Slav defense, and I'm gonna keep an eye out for if my opponents play the Slav, and I'm gonna keep my notes handy, so that way I am reminded that the main trick from White's perspective is we want to get an early a4 push to stop any shenanigans. And from Black's perspective, we're going to capture here after White has committed its knight. And then we're going to get ready to try to control this light square, or this light diagonal. Alrighty, guys. If you see the Slav, play it, enjoy it, and let me know how it goes. I'll talk to you later. Bye.